Good afternoon. I just want to say this has been one of the best days I've had here at blackdoctor.org. This has been a phenomenal day with regards to the state of Black health. And so this is the first of many of these summits that we're going to do throughout this year because we know Black health, just like Black history, is not relegated to one day and is not relegated to 1 month. It is an everyday activity. We're starting it today. And we're going to continue this to give you the information that you need to be the best health advocate, not only for yourself, but for your family and for your loved ones. And so that's what we're here for. So we had a wonderful day. We talked about COVID. We talked about breast cancer. We talked about heart disease. And we just talked about eating right and exercise and health in the Black family. And now we're adding that final piece in this particular panel, which is near and dear to my heart, because those of you that know me know that my training is in mental health. And this is about managing our mental health. So if you think about what we've been talking about today, we've been talking about these macro issues, but they all boil down to 4 things that we've got to do. We've got to eat right. We've got to exercise. We've got to sleep, get enough sleep, and we've got to manage our stress. Those 4 things are paramount to our health and wellness. And so I'm excited about having this panel. So we're going to talk about managing our mental health. Dr. Gigi, you refreshed? You ready for one more? We got one.
I am. And, I just want to thank blackdoctor.org because when I pitched this idea of having the state of Black health and doing it on MLK holiday, I felt that, so much is focused on COVID that we're forgetting the other health aspects. And also from the program, I hope that people have walked away not just with understanding the issues, but more importantly, or just as importantly, what people can do in terms of action. Right. Like you, Mr. Ellis, I get energized, I get inspired, I get lifted up when I see my colleagues and, from the medical profession, patients, faith-based, who are just really bringing it and doing such great work for their patients, for their communities, for people that never even met before. So this particular session, mental health, I think for me personally is probably the one that I struggle with the most. And let me tell you why. It's been a triple pandemic. It wasn't enough to have the previous administration and the 4 continuous years that have continued of insults and racism that's more overt. So the pandemic of I'm going to say the T word for the previous administration, racism, COVID, and then the serial murders of Black people. And, you know that I had cancer in the midst of all of this. And then certainly as somebody who takes care of patients, I've had 61 patients diagnosed with COVID. All of them are fine except the one that didn't get vaccinated. But it is like COVID, when will it be over, right? It's like, when will it be over? And so I'm here not just as somebody, as a panelist, but also I'm here to get some good advice and also to learn from our next guest, Pastor Webb. And I'm going to introduce Pastor Webb, if that's okay. Yes, Pastor Webb is a dear friend, and she ministers at the Temple of Praise Church here in Washington, D.C. And let me brag on the Temple of Praise here for a second. Temple of Praise, which is led by Bishop Staples, is the largest church in Ward 8, has 10,000 congregants, and he actually oversees about 60,000 people through the Fellowship of Churches. Can I tell you that since the COVID pandemic, 2 million meals have been delivered, 2 million meals, not just to the congregants, but people who live in the area. People get vaccinated and tested 3 days a week on site. The education that the church is doing, and of course, not just Temple of Praise, many people in the faith-based community, leaders all around the country. But I think probably the most important piece, or certainly important, is ministering to our mental health and our spiritual health. So, with that, Pastor Webb, actually, before we came on camera, you were sharing some of the losses that you faced just in the last few days.
Yes, yes. Good afternoon to all of our viewers, and thank you so much to the Rodham Institute, my dear friend and my twin, Dr. Gigi, and to Mr. Ellis Dean, our friend there, blackdoctor.org. It has been tremendous today. The information that has been disseminated is critical. It's very important for us to discuss those topics. And Dr. Gigi, being the visionary that she is, if I could brag on her for a moment, even, asking, could we do this and how befitting to do it on Martin Luther King Jr.'s day? Because we're still a work in progress, and we all know that. And it's not a racist dialogue. It's about us making certain that we understand what happens within our culture, because everything needs to be addressed or even looked through the lens of a person's culture. That's what we do when we talk about faith tradition. We talk about culture because we want to make messages relevant. We want to make teachings relevant. As we're educating people, we want to make it relevant, right? And so with COVID, I shared with with Dr. Gigi, Mr. Dean, that one of my dear godsons, he passed on yesterday, and it has been just devastating. One of my dear friends, 2 weeks ago, she passed, and they eulogized her and her daughter, Mr. Dean. Her and her daughter died the same week. The daughter died on Tuesday. She died on Friday. And from what I've been told, all of these individuals were unvaccinated. And I said, I wish I had known, because, I'm kind of bold. I'm what they consider one of those bold preachers. I'm not afraid to confront you and, in a loving way, but I would have sent them a message, and I would have sent them a free copy of my book that I wrote, COVID-19, about my experience, Dark Shadows, because you need to get vaccinated. We need to protect ourselves. And in the world of Christendom, I teach people, I tell them, don't give the enemy no help killing you. I'm not going to give the enemy any help to kill me, because God uses doctors, God uses medicine. And if they have ways to try to mitigate some of the devastating effects of COVID-19, let us get vaccinated, because there's so much grief. Hence, we're talking about mental health. The mental health issues have extremely exacerbated. When you talk about all the grief, the anger, the anxiety, the pain, I mean, it is just incomparable at this time, when 2022, because we thought, well, we were hoping and praying that we would be past this, right? But we're still dealing with the numbers exponentially.
Right.
We're still dealing with the overwhelming of our hospital systems. All of this, Dr. Gigi and Mr. Dean, can create mental health issues for all of us. It's just that some of us, we're managing it because we're healthy mentally. But for individuals who have some sicknesses mentally, it exacerbates their condition.
Mm-hmm.
It's like Dr. Gigi talked about all these other health conditions. When you talk about chronic health conditions such as high blood pressure, and you talk about cancer and all the things we talk about, end stage renal disease, all of these things, people are so anxious. You can't get out, you can't be amongst people. Some people, their children, and I'm a grandparent now, so you even have anxiety about your grandchildren, especially those that can't get vaccinated. Will they get it and then bring it? All of that falls under the parameters of our mental health.
Right.
And so we really need to be cognizant and very aware of it.
So, Pastor, you've shared with me before that your church, you're actually calling ambulances to the church because people are just breaking down. Can you speak about exactly what's happening?
Yes, we have. We have had individuals in the church. I am pretty much known as a prayer warrior, as a prophet of God who can speak to and really look in the spirit realm what's going on. And oftentimes, Bishop will assign me, if something happens, he'll tell me, go down off the pulpit and help address it. And we have had to call, because I said to them, no, this is not someone that's just being erratic. This is a person that is really in the middle of a mental breakdown. This is a person that is actively in front of you, decompensating mentally. This is not, I don't care, we can stand here and pray and spit and do everything you want to do. Now they need medical intervention. So we've had to call ambulances and get them involved. And thankfully, one thing that's good about DC now, Dr. Gigi, that we found out having to call EMTs is even in with the police, because the temple have actual police on staff that they employ, is that now they have engaged their staff and specifically trained some of them in de-escalating mental health cases, not just going in, as we have unfortunately heard, many people have lost their lives because police didn't know how to deal with it and go and just kill an individual that didn't even have a gun. They were just mentally, they were decompensating. And so that's the big plus when you talk about community coming together. They have something there. So they have dispatched those individuals to the church who were specifically trained how to deal with mental decompensation, to come there, and the ambulance come, and we've had to go and, and I've had to be in a room with individuals and use my training as a mental health chaplain, a professional chaplain working in one of the most renowned mental health hospitals, St. Elizabeth's Hospital, and use my training to help, try to de-escalate a situation and get the individual to the hospital that they can get some psychiatric intervention. And it is critical. It is important.
Can I'm going to take one moment here to kind of build the framework, the foundation of where we are as Black people in terms of our mental health, right? And what is the foundation of our mental health? So remember, we were brought here against our will, and so that is part of our psyche, right? That is part of who we are.
Yes.
There's a term in mental health, it's called the collective unconscious, and so that thing that connects all people, whether they can or not, right? We all can, based on being African American. So what goes into that? What goes into that is the stereotypes that have been created, the narratives that have been created about us, right? That creates those microaggressions, the lazy, the violent, all of these negative stereotypes that are placed upon our people that were untrue, but we started to absorb them, because if you tell somebody something enough, they're going to believe you about themselves. If they don't know anything else, they're going to start to believe you. And so ultimately that's part of it. Then we've got this other part that's within our cultures, that's outside of the culture. We've got this part that's within our culture that says we don't talk about our injuries. We don't talk about our ailments. We just had on an earlier panel, we had a patient on, she had a heart attack and a stroke. And she said very explicitly, Dr. Gigi, you could back me up on this. She said her father had an issue, her mother had an issue, but she didn't know it because they never talked about it. And maybe if she had said that to her doctor, they would have run the test to catch her heart disease earlier because they knew she had a family history. But since we don't talk about those things, we put our head down, we keep pressing on, that we're missing some vital information that could be paramount to our mental ability to be able to deal with the world. Now we're talking about being disconnected from our homeland. We're talking about being disconnected from our education because they're cutting it out of our school books. So we don't understand the rich history and what Black people have brought to this country. And then we've got all these microaggressions that we go through every day that just tells us you're not good enough, you're not this, you're not that. That is the foundation of our mental health, not our daily lives, not what we have to deal with going to our job or dealing with our kids on a daily basis or the dog or whatever else you got going on a day-to-day basis. That's just the foundation of the mental health issue for Black people in this country.
And if I could just add, I'm not a member of the African diaspora. I come from the African continent, at least my parents did. I was born and raised here. There is nothing in the world's history, nothing that even comes close to matching what the last several hundred years have been for African Americans, not even close. And the multi-generational effect that is seen in people's DNA that actually impacts health, not to mention what that has done to the mindset as well, because shackles of the brain are just as crucial as as and important and destructive as any other physical health condition.
Mhm.
So I think that, you have said this before, I've said this before, the post-traumatic slave disorder
Yes.
is real. It is
Yes.
real. But I also want to talk about, because that's the reality, and they're not microaggressions, they're macroaggressions. You know what I mean? Let's call it, and it's racism, it's, in medicine, it's a medical apartheid state. Let's just call it what it is.
Absolutely.
But I want to talk with you a little bit, Pastor Webb, and also you, Mr. Dean, as a person who's got the Masters of Psychology. I want to distinguish what depression looks like in men versus women. Because in my experience, men can be very aggressive and angry, with people who they love, of course. And actually, it could be depression. Can either of you speak to that, please?
Well, yes, if I could for one moment digress, even talking about the issues of racism, and as a spiritual care clinician, that's what we do. We're not dismissing what we have suffered, but we try to find ways of engaging and positively addressing those issues, even such as, and Mr. Dean is, he related to the aggressions, the microaggressions, and you say macro, but even our silent class system that's unspoken, but is perpetuated. When you look at even all genres, right? And you look at in hospitals and everywhere where the people who are the cleaners, the environmentalists, the people who are the cooks, the people, what is considered menial jobs, but now we're calling them heroes, right? Because they're heroes. So our psyche, though, affects our soma. It affects our soma because when you think about depression tells us cognitive lies. It tells us cognitive lies, such as you don't have no hope. That's where my job come in. You are worthless. You don't have no hope. As a Black man, you are insignificant. You don't matter. And so with these things, we try to teach individuals, don't internalize these things. Don't make it your truth. Okay, because it's telling you a cognitive lie, your cognition. You have to think about who you are and try to surround yourself with positive people and think positive thoughts. And of course, we understand, I find, Dr. Gigi, with men, especially working with them in St. Elizabeth's, I found that men, of course, a maniacal state, right, can be sleep deprived. And a lot of times, for me, it seems like a lot of my men patients, they weren't as open to CBT as the women were because they were in this.
Can you say what CBT is?
Yes. Cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm sorry. Just simply getting them to think about, their behavior and why you're doing what you're doing. So much so that one of my dear friends, and he's gone on now, he was a Black psychologist there, and he developed this new group, which we coined African American Cognitive Behavioral Therapy Group. And in that group, one of the things that we did with the individuals is have them go through a timeline. And I found in that group that a lot of times men attributed their problems and their depression and their issues with what Mr. Dean first alluded to. Society has done me wrong. They have, marginalized me. They have minimized my worth. And the way we try to help them, whereas women would sit there, and unfortunately, a lot of times with the women, the depression would come from a failed love relationship. Not loving themselves, or some type of physical abuse that they just couldn't overcome. And, they got in a depressed state. I wasn't pretty enough. I wasn't good enough. Right. Again, it all goes back to your psyche, how you think it. And so we found that we started having success because we would tell each individual, okay, we need you. Let's examine this. Okay. Because we're not saying that these things aren't real. These things didn't happen. But now we have to positively engage and address what is happening to you, because if you continue to carry this with you in your life, how will you recover? How will you get better? And so we found great success in that program, but men were a lot more resistant initially to share their timeline and to talk about why did you get so depressed? Why did you get in a state of depression? And a lot of times, if I may say also, Dr. Gigi and Mr. Ding, with men, we found their issue was tied to economics.
Yes.
I became depressed because I couldn't get a job. My family was poor. We couldn't eat. I got angry. I went to the store and I robbed them, and they said something wrong to me, and that's why I shot them.
Yeah.
And it really all ended up, when you talk about diagnoses, depression was a part of it. Some of them manic depression. So that was my experience.
I think that Dr. Gigi and Pastor, you did a wonderful job explaining that. So I'm just going to add a little to that, is that men externalize their issues, right? So it is, I don't have a job, I don't have this, they're beating down on me, they're marginalizing me.
Yes.
That's external acting upon the body. And so therefore that's why the reaction you're talking about is anger. You're mad that you don't have a job. You're mad that they're marginalizing you. You're mad that they're treating you this way. And so that's where the anger comes from. Women tend to internalize that. They tend to say, I'm not this, I'm not that. They make those I statements instead of the external finger pointing at something. They're pointing it at themselves, and they're internalizing that. And so that manifests itself in terms of expression of the depression being very, very different and how they express it. And so men get angry. And so when I was treating children, if a little boy was angry, especially Black boys, they were quick to say conduct disorder, right? And that's an easy catch-all phrase. And I'm like, no, let's examine what's going on in this young man's life. Depression is expressing itself as anger. That's not a conduct disorder. This child is depressed because of the situations. So let's talk about that versus just labeling him conduct disorder, because we know that's a basket of that many of our Black boys and Black children get dumped into, which basically means I can't help you. And that's
and if I could just add, and by the way, my battery on this iPad is running low. That's why I'm backstage on my phone. So, feel free to let me in. That way I can have a more secure connection. But I think that oftentimes, especially children, are labeled. They may be held back in school. They're much more likely to have medications thrown at them, right? Thank you so much. I'm going to just make that transition now so that you can. Sorry.
Technology.
Trying to get out.
Yeah, let's take that other one. We'll take that other one out. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, there. Are we good? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay, let me make this a little bit louder. I'm sorry. Can you see me and hear me okay now?
Yes.
Great. So that the labeling, the medications that get thrown at kids. And so what happens is, especially children get their trajectory in terms of education and their confidence in themselves goes awry. We actually had wanted to have these guests on the show, Dr. Kirkland Vons and Dr. Warren Spielberg, who were unable to join us today. They wrote a 2-part book series called The Psychology of Black Boys and Teens. And simple things like saying, like they've shown in a study that they did, when you tell a Black child, and I say boy on purpose because Black boys on average get 4 years added to them. Instead of treating a 9-year-old like a 9-year-old, they will often be treated as much older. We forget to treat them like children. So if they're told your ancestors were slaves, it's very different than when you say your ancestors were enslaved.
Yeah.
The reaction is very, very different. And so I think it's important not just to identify how, the expression of emotional problems or mental health problems come up, but to both of you that are sort of the experts, let me ask, how does then one handle these? You've mentioned cognitive behavioral therapy, Pastor. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what that's about?
Well, it's our cognition is basically how we're thinking, right? And so we really take you back to, let's look at your behavior basically that led you to think and believe what you felt you responded to. Because a lot of times when you're in a mental health institution and they're in St. Elizabeth's, you have people who are there also on criminal charges, not just, civil, but some on the criminal side. But I found it interesting. I wrote a paper. I had to present to a group of psychiatrists and psychologists because we're trying to help them understand the benefit of one's culture and their faith tradition and helping them to acknowledge and realize what's going on, how you're thinking, what shape you're thinking, right? Because our thinking has been shaped from when we were born, our parents. And I wrote a paper from this book that's a very good book. It's called The Protest Psychosis. So I did a paper on protest psychosis because I found it interesting. It covered the history of a hospital, Dr. Gigi, in the 60s. The Iona State Hospital there in your state where you went to school, Iona, Michigan. And this place, so many African-American men, they were saying had mental health issues that they converted it into a correctional facility. Because so Jonathan Meltz, he wrote the book and he talked about as he talked to all these individuals, it really was a protest psychosis. The psychosis, the mental breakdowns they were having was a protest, speaking to what Mr. Dean said, the external factors, the marginalization, how you're treating us as Black men, how we're not even a whole citizen. And so in cognitive behavioral therapy, we would sit them down and say, okay, let's examine. It may be painful. And of course, that's why you have a whole cadre, a team, a multidisciplinary team, because if it gets unmanageable, then, okay, wait a minute, you don't need to talk anymore today. We're going to then talk to the psychiatrist and suggest that you get a little more strongly medicated before you come in, because it can be painful and helping people to go back, because we're trying to really find the root, right? We're really trying to find the root. And so we found that when you help individuals think about it, even as painful as it may be, and learn why you behave this way. Could it have been this? Could it have been that? Now that you're sharing with us, and most of the time, like I said, with the men, when they would go back, and it became very successful because men who would come to the class and be very angry, the anger started dissipating. And then they started agreeing, because you got to get them involved in that awakening. You have to get them involved. Let's study your behavior. We went all the way back to when you could remember. If you were a child 5 years old, what happened? And so that's what I say when I say cognitive. And the group was so popular, a lot of psychiatrists, psychologists started saying, we want our individuals to come into your class, but we had a certain capacity. We couldn't hold everybody. Of course, the hospital don't have all just African Americans, but we found it to be very successful because we have to examine. It's always a cause and effect, right? Let's go back and look. Let's go back and see. And it may be painful, but we're here for you. We're here with you. We're here to walk you through re-examining your journey so you can make better choices. Because if you don't, and we let you out of this hospital, even if we put you on psychotropic drugs, whatever we do, you can decide, I'm not going to take it today. I don't feel like it, especially men, because they feel like it messes with their libido. I'm not going to take it. Then you might just be back in the same situation. So let's not just depend on the medications. Let's look at our thought process. Let's look at the thoughts that led us to the behavior. And that's what I mean when I say that. Mr. Dean?
Yeah, so cognitive behavioral therapy is a fancy way of saying self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
That's good.
And so there's a portion of the brain, I believe, Dr. Gigi, it's a reticular activating system. And basically what that says is a portion of the brain, and what that is, a fancy way of saying is this: what we attend to is we're going to manifest in our life. Those things that are important to us, we're going to manifest in our life. So the cognition that Pastor Webb is talking about is those cognitions. If we can get somebody to change those cognitions to something that's more positive, to something that's more productive, that's going to manifest in their behaviors in their life. And so those cognitions, those negative cognitions, turn into negative behaviors. Positive cognitions turn into positive behaviors. The second thing I would say is, like, when I was working with clients, one of the things we would always try to identify is, and I would make it easy. You ever throw a rock in a lake, right? Hits the water and everything ripples out. I would say, I want to get to where the rock hit the water. right? Where your life made that change. And so if you watch any of those programs, you say there's a significant, there's something in their life that caused them to go down this path.
Absolutely.
And everything ripples out from where that rock hit the water. So the closest I can get to where that rock hit the water, the better chance I have for them coming to peace with those significant issues that cause those rippling effects into their lives.
Yes.
And then I can get them to better change those cognitions because they don't have that negative self-talk, they don't have that self-deprecating behavior, and those other actions that come from having, the wrong cognitions.
And if I could just add, of course, the link between physical and mental health is beginning to get some attention in sort of Western medicine. Yes. But, I come from a tradition, an African tradition, where almost every illness is explained by what's happening. So my father, he's got high blood pressure. He says, I'm hypertense. And it's that tension that's making my blood pressure go up. There's always a sort of a reason, right, for illnesses. And to be able to understand the link between those two, tension and stress, and how that plays into worsening of diabetes, development of cancer. So when we address, overall health, it is not a separation of mind and body. Okay. But I'd like to speak about spiritual health because, you've mentioned that, Pastor, and I know that your church certainly has a holistic view of dealing with a person. But sometimes you will hear people say, well, I'm going to just pray it out. Not just, but I will pray it out. I'm not electing, I'm declining the medications and therapy. I don't want to talk about my problems with a stranger. What do you say to that?
Well, what I say to Dr. Gigi, I want to first say that, when you're dealing with individuals and their cognition and walking people through things, we try to make people comfortable because people have to have an openness to be comfortable to vulnerability because I'm opening up and I'm being vulnerable, right? Because I don't know what you're going to do with my information. Right. But when you talk about spiritually, you look at colloquialisms of faith. We have many colloquialisms, such as, people say God is good, and we respond all the time, God is good, and they're really benign and they're superficial, especially to an individual that is struggling with something because you telling me God is good, and I'm sitting here and I just buried 5 family members from COVID, and I'm asking you, well, where is God good? I don't see no good in that. And so we try to refrain from using colloquialisms of faith. What we try to do is help people get in touch with their God, the way that they relate to their God, which in my tradition, my faith tradition, being a Christian, I serve Jesus Christ. But you may be Muslim, you may be Jewish, you're serving Allah, Yahweh, whatever. But we want you to first get in touch with the way you worship, because some people worship God through nature. One way we found that was really good, what Mr. Dean was mentioning about the ripple effect, about the the stone in the pond, we would walk individuals around the labyrinth that, and tell them, start reflecting, start thinking, get in touch, because some people, that's the way they get in touch with their spiritual side. And you find them, when people get in touch with their spiritual side, then they start gaining some strength and panic dissipates. Because a lot of time when we panic, we can't assess our reality. If you get frightened to death, you can't assess your reality. And that's what we found with a lot of people with COVID, right? They became frightened to death for the vaccination, so they couldn't assess their reality that if you don't get vaccinated, you really could die from contracting this illness. And so in our faith tradition, we try to take people back to the word. Okay, let's look at what the word say. Okay, we're not going to use colloquialisms. We aren't going to do that and talk about, because even though God is good, he's still good, and we trust him for everything, even when we don't understand. But we now need to go to God and ask God for some help. We need to ask God for some strength. We need to ask God to help us to understand. So what we do in that case, Dr. Gigi, we start giving scriptures that speaks to some of these things that we suffer, such as Proverbs, the 3rd chapter, which is in the world of Christendom, is a very popular scripture. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not to your own understanding. but in all your ways acknowledge him, and he gonna direct your path. He gonna help you, you know. And so it's no easy way to deal with addressing mental health issues, and we have had so much of it nowadays. There is no easy way of getting individuals out of that state of mind that they're in. It takes a multidisciplinary team, but what we found is that we're trying to promote that you must make spirituality. That's what I love about you. I remember when we started years ago, even in Barry Farms, and you said to me, you said, Pastor, you know what? I think I need to institute a program with my medical students and have them to take a class with addressing health disparity in communities like this. And I thought that was absolutely wonderful, and incorporating spiritual traditions, because you have to become multidisciplinary, and a person's faith tradition has got to be a part of the remedy. It has to be a part of it. And when you include that, and fortunately in medicine it's becoming very inclusive now, and when you do that, we find that it helps people to heal. It helps people to heal. And so nowadays people are in depressive mood, people are irritable, they withdrawn, people are just going through all kinds of things. And that's the issue, even with us as pastors and leaders, because we're human, right? It shows that we're all human. We all are feeling the pressure. We're all tired of the deaths. We're all tired of all the negative news. All of those are mental issues. Well, where do we find it? We find our hope in the word. We find our strength in the word. And the word tells us the joy of the Lord is our strength. And so we tell people, we're not saying that this is not going to make you weak. We aren't saying that this is going to drop you to your knees. We aren't saying, because guess what? Some of us have dropped to our knees with what we are experiencing. What we're saying, we got to find a way to use our faith tradition to assist us, to help us get back up and keep standing, because all of us got to keep living until we die. What are we going to do? We're going to kill.
I think
well, you know, I want to share a story from my patient from last week. So this is a patient that I've been taking care of for a very long time. And he seemed kind of, he's coming in for his physical, feeling a little blue. I'm like, what's going on? And he says, I find that I'm preoccupied with death. I said, why? He said, well, death is all around me. You turn on the news, there's death. There's, the natural disasters. There's, all the killings of Black people. I watch the shows. My wife likes to watch the crime shows, and so there's a lot of death there. There's violence. And my mom has had a stroke, and I'm worried about her mortality, thinking about my own mortality. I said, okay, so, are you somebody that is religious? Do you have a church? He said, no, not really. I said, well, when you face that, what do? He goes, I think it away, which I thought was very interesting. I try to think of other things. I watch, comedies on, before I go to sleep. I tell my wife we don't need to watch the ID and, all these kinds of criminal shows. I said, that's actually my guilty pleasure. I love to watch that. But now he's not at the point where he is depressed. I said, well, do you want to maybe talk to somebody about this? Because also, he was the one that has to take care of his mother. He's got siblings, got a lot of pressure on himself, works very hard. And he says, for right now, I'm okay, but I might come back to you to get the name of a therapist. So it is about having the space, right, of allowing somebody to talk, and actually even sharing one's own vulnerability. And Pastor, you've known me for a bit, and now, of course, you, Mr. Ellis, I'm telling you, it is rough. It's rough as a frontline anything, right? Whether it's, take sanitation worker to doctor to grocery store, anything that interfaces with the public, because I have never been yelled at so often as I have, I think, in my 37 years combined as I have been in the last 6 months. We're human beings, right?
Yes.
Think about it like this, Dr. Gigi.
Tell me, I need some good advice. I do.
We already lived in uncertain times, right?
Yes.
Prior to COVID.
Yes.
COVID was an accelerant. So now we're living in more uncertain times. We don't know if we go to the store, we run by a restaurant, can we contract the illness that could kill us, right? That is a level of uncertainty that is disconcerting, that can wreak havoc on our mental stability, knowing that every time I leave my house, I might be bringing something back to my family members. What spiritual health does, it provides certainty in an uncertain world. You say, I am certain that my belief system my faith is going to help give me the strength to get through whatever I need to have. So as part of that mental health, if somebody has a sound spiritual health that provides some certainty, it provides an anchor for them to where now we can start building on what Pastor Webb is talking about in terms of that cognitive behavioral therapy, because they've got an anchor that can hold and stabilize them while we're rebuilding how they think and view and engage in the world. But without that anchor, without that certainty, it becomes a much heftier task to take on, because now we don't have an anchor. We don't have a place for them to
I
hang
think
their
that's
head.
why.
Go ahead, Dr. Gigi.
No, I was going to say one of the groups that's really suffering the most are actually teenagers.
Yes.
The number of, especially in Black and Brown communities, kids that are suicidal or actually completing suicide attempts is just skyrocketing because they don't necessarily have that anchor. But what I want to ask both of you is, how do we find, or what are the warning signs that are taking us from feeling overstressed to really, now I'm in trouble. I'm going to the next level, and I might be heading to just a complete collapse. And maybe this requires therapy and medications. What tells us that we're going down that road where we may need, yes, I believe in cognitive behavioral therapy, but that takes some time, right?
Yes. Well, if I could digress for a moment, I think the greatest thing when you talk about spirituality and what we do, Dr. Gigi, you write prescriptions for meds and I give prescriptions for hope, because it's all about hope, right? It's built around hope. We're hoping that things will change. And so what we want you to do is not fixate on what you lost. And it is real and it is relevant and it's important to you. And we allow you to talk about that, but let's not fixate. Let's not stay there. Let's not anchor there on what you've lost. Let's also look what you have left. You have a lot left. And so we find when we take that approach, we're building hope back up. And some people take much longer. That's why we know you can't tell people how to grieve, because grief is just not losing a person. It's losing a job, as we've done in this pandemic. It's a lot of grieving going on. Losing jobs, marriages have imploded, losing marriages, losing family members. All of that entails grief. And so if we could promote hope and tell people it's going to get better. I know right now it's tough, but it's going to get better. And let's focus on what we also have left. And we found when we do that, and especially as I worked as a chaplain in Washington Hospital Center and MedStar, seeing so much death, a lot of my colleagues would just quit because they couldn't see so much death, that I found that I had a lot of success with families having to go in and talk to them. And particularly, Dr. Gigi, speaking to all these teenagers getting murdered in DC. And so you go into the parents and you go into their friends who are in the hallway and laying on the floor and screaming and hollering and crying. And some of them, again, losing their will to live. Or on the flip side, well, what is it to live for? And so, again, we got to promote hope. And so one of the things we find that you can tell people are spiraling, one of the things most people do, they start isolating. They really start isolating and becoming very secretive, don't want anyone to know what they're doing, who they're with, where they are. A lot of times they be around a crowd. They're still in isolation. They go into a place of isolation, like their mind is thinking about something. You try to get them to engage, try to get them to talk, and a lot of times they will hide what they're feeling. And my advice would be to people, if you don't have the experience with it, reach out to somebody like Mr. Dean, reach out to a therapist. What can I do? Call some of these helplines. What should I look for? But one of the primary things you will find that a lot of them do, they start isolating. and their behavior starts changing. They're spiraling. They're spiraling. A lot of times they start having conversation that isn't really coherent. One thing has nothing to do with the other, you know? And so if you aren't experienced with that, reach out and ask someone for their help. Try to do what you can do, because unfortunately, with a lot of these kids that are committing suicide, then the parents start carrying this guilt. There's another mental health issue.
Right.
Now they got all this guilt. How did I miss it? Why didn't I see it? And as I tell them, you have to be comfortable in being vulnerable. Stop being so secretive. Many of us, I have grown children. I've had challenges raising my children. I was never secretive about the challenges I had. I went to people that were my spiritual parents. How did you deal with this? You know, when you got sons that are teenagers and, you know, that testosterone, Mr. Dean, is kicking in. You know, you got to get some help, right, Mr. Dean?
Look, that testosterone, they make you do some more things. But I think two things are, we already talked about uncertainty, right? So we talked about teenagers, right? And spike. So they already live in uncertain times, right? And then you've got a lack of control because they're a teenager. Their lives are controlled by what the parents do, right? I got a 14-year-old son. He's able to eat because I work and I bring food home, right?
Yes.
He has no control over where he sleeps, where he eats, what he does. I take him to school, you know. So all of these things. So you've got talking to a teenager that has a lack of control and live in a world of uncertainty. So those things can be very, very impactful on our mental health. So what we've got to do, and then as I talked about later, as a culture, we're not really taught to express ourselves, to share those type of feelings, right? So now you're uncertain, you've got no control, and you've got no outlet to be able to let that frustration out, to talk about what's going on, or to have somebody that has an ear that says, hey, look, come and talk to me. So those can lead a child, especially a teenage child that doesn't have the full frontal lobe developed. And we talked about brain development, which is where reasoning and judgment happens. This doesn't get developed until our early 20s. So we have an underdeveloped frontal lobe where they have poor reasoning and judgment. They have uncertainty, loss of control, and don't have the tools to be able to express their frustration. That can lead a child to a bad decision that is permanent, and that about suicide. So we got to be
absolutely
understand that's the formula. So what Pastor Webb is talking about, absolutely, isolating, being irritable, sleep patterns disrupted, right? Either sleeping too much or not sleeping enough. Their eating patterns are disrupted. We can see in women sometimes they become promiscuous in their behavior. So I'm trying to give you all some things so that you can kind of identify when you're seeing somebody in your life. You say and men can become promiscuous too, but they just risk-taking behaviors. Let's put it in a bucket for men and women too. So risk-taking behaviors can escalate very, very quickly. And so those are the things you got to identify that says this person is not just crazy as we try to put that label on them. They're depressed. They have some situations that we need to really address.
Yeah, and people, are trying coping mechanisms. They may not be healthy coping mechanisms, whether that's alcohol or drugs or food or sex. I think another layer to add for kids or teenagers is that they have lost a lot. Right. They usually have their friends they can go, to parties or to the movies or to the mall. That's completely gone. And let's not forget the negative impact that social media has.
Oh, yeah.
You can go down a rabbit hole.
That's another whole show. That's another whole show.
Exactly.
That's another whole show.
Add a couple of things from the standpoint of warning signs. All the things that you mentioned, but I think for the individual, if they cannot stop thinking, it's like a circuit. They keep ruminating and going from one problem to the next to the next. And are thinking that it would be a better world if they just disappeared. And then the biggest warning is if people start to have a plan. That's really thinking about how they're going to carry it out. That's a time when you need immediate professional help. Professional help. Mm-hmm.
Dr. Gigi, I want to say, having raised men, that I taught my sons when they were young, it's okay to be expressive. because I find in our culture, your manhood is equated with your lack of emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And I dismissed that with my sons. I said, that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to be emotional. It's okay to cry. It's
Mm-hmm.
okay to come to me. I don't care. We can talk about anything. You have to keep that door open. This misnomer that men are more of a man if he doesn't cry, if he doesn't show his emotions, you don't want that stuff bottled up, because again, that leads to some of those issues.
Mm-hmm.
And we as parents also have to be okay. I was always a little liberal, they say, but you have to be okay that there is another adult that your child can also talk to, like my sons could talk to my father or to my mother, because some things they may not be as comfortable with talking to their mother when they are men, just as girls may not be as comfortable talking to their dads as they would their mother or grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
So even as a parent, you got to be okay with that and not be angry. Well, why you tell them and didn't tell me? I don't care who you tell somebody, so
Exactly.
then we can become a team and address the issue. I just don't want you to hold it in. If you're mad, you're angry, you're feeling mistreated, let's talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way I raised my sons, to be healthy.
If I could add one thing, because I know we're coming up on our time, but if I add one thing, as a parent, you did a great job of doing that. We have to show our children all of the things that encompass being an adult. And what I mean by that is acknowledging when you're wrong, right? Because a lot of times parents, old school parents, they were never wrong. Like my mama was never wrong. Like she was always right, even when she was dead wrong. But I think as a parent, we have to show that to our children. If we wrong our children, we say, look, hey, I'm not the person. So I make it now with my children and say, look, I got this wrong. I didn't learn the best way to parent all the time, and I'm going to make some mistakes, but please work with me. That goes a long way in getting to release some of that pressure that can build up from just being just expecting perfection from our children all the time, because I'm telling you how to do it. You're supposed to do it. No, give them the room, give them the grace to make those mistakes. Don't always beat down on them, and acknowledge when you make a mistake as a parent. So, you know what? I handled that the wrong way. Let's talk about how we can handle this better going forward. Working with your child is not being weak. It's not lowering their level. It's not lowering your level as a parent. It's actually teaching your child how to be a more healthy and well-rounded individual.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
I want to give a name of a resource, and I actually happen to sit on the tribal council of the Boris Henson Foundation. Taraji Henson has been very open about her own struggles with mental health, and she created a foundation in honor of her father, who also struggled. And this foundation is dedicated to getting mental health services as well as educating the African American community about issues of mental health. So they provide 4 free sessions for people. So please visit the website for the Boris Henson Foundation. Also, if you're trying to find a therapist that insurance may or may not cover, it depends on your insurance type, you can go to psychologytoday.com. But I can't speak highly enough about the Boris Henson Foundation. But, reach out. I think also just, looking after one another. I mean, it's amazing what a word of kindness shows to people that one works with, that see, you don't even have to know them that well. It's everything.
That's right.
Okay. Sometimes that's all you need to do, right?
That's all, Dr. Gigi. And it's all about sensitivity. It's all about kindness. It's all about a non-judgment zone, because you don't know what people have been through. I love Taraji and her doing that. And I love, years ago when I started mental health, it was so much stigma around it, people didn't even want to discuss it. But now we're finding that there's some destigmatization, because you have a lot of high-profile individuals such as Taraji. I love football. I love Brandon Marshall. He has a foundation now that he deals with mental health, because he's had his mental health challenges. A lot of them in professional sports now talking about mental health challenges. The young lady that was a part of, I don't know her name, she sang with Beyonce. I think her name is Michelle Williams or something. They say she did it. They say she did. Yeah.
That's his child, right?
Right. and she talked about her mental health challenges. So, I'm just thankful that we are more open to discuss it, and let us be kind to one another, because everybody has their own threshold.
Amen.
Everybody has their own threshold with what they can handle and what their background is and where they come from. But if we're really going to think about Dr. Martin Luther King, all of us being who we are here on the shoulders. We are here on the shoulders of our ancestors. None of us have done it alone. So let's help one another. Let's stand with one another. And certainly we know we need to pray for one another, especially in this hour with all that's going on. We need much prayer, and we need to be here to support and love on one another.
Wow, what a nice way to sort of close out the day, Pastor Webb. You brought it. You brought it.
So I got all the way to the end of the day, and then I finally dropped 5 hours, and then I finally have. But I will take that. I will take that one.
Yeah. I would just also add another word, and that's decency.
Yes.
Decency. Be decent. Well, we've certainly talked about a lot today, and I so thank you, Pastor Webb, for joining us. Do you have any other sort of last words that you want to share with everybody?
Well, thank you so much for having me. And to everyone, I want to say, first of all, mental health illness is not a scandal. It's not scandalous. You are not alone. It is okay to seek help when you're having mental health problems. It is okay to seek someone's assistance when you notice your child is having problems. Don't be in denial. Get help. It can be treated. It can be managed. Nowadays, medicine has come so far. It's no longer giving you Thorazine and sitting you in a corner. It is manageable, and it is okay. All of us, Dr. Gigi, as I shared, and we did our summit a few years back, and I told everyone, who has ever been in the bed in the morning and just didn't feel like getting up? Almost the whole audience raised their hand. All of us, right? And as I told them, a lot of people who are really depressed, that's how it starts. But guess what? We start just like them. The only difference is we have the capacity to pull ourselves up. And Dr. Martin Luther King had his famous saying when he talked about pulling us up from our bootstraps. How are we going to pull us up from bootstraps if we don't have boots, right? Everybody don't have boots, So we have to give people coping mechanisms. And so when we do that, one way we do that, we do it as the love of Christ does. And that show people love and try to understand where people are and be empathetic and don't judge people. Be kind to people. And most of all, know your limitations. If you can't handle it, find you some help. We have great resources like blackdoctor.org, the Rodham Institute. We have great institutions in America that can help you. But please don't suffer alone. That's what I want to say to you. Don't suffer alone. If it's you, your family member, whatever, you're grieving, mental health, grief, anger, anxiety, fear, don't do it alone. Help is here. And we love you, and we're praying for you and for all of us that things are going to get better.
Inshallah.
Amen to that. Amen to that. Well, thank you, Pastor Webb, and you're welcome back anytime. Anytime you want to come, just you got my email, you got my information. Just shoot me and say, Ellis, I got something on my chest, want to get off, and we'll stop and we'll get you on.
This was my therapy session, Pastor.
This has been wonderful. But in conclusion for the day, and I think Pastor Webb summed it all up. Don't suffer alone. And if it's not just mentally, we're talking about physical health too.
Yes.
Don't suffer alone. Don't think that chest pain is normal. Don't think that ankle pain is normal. Don't think that gut pain is normal. Get it checked out. Know your family history. Know what's happening in your family, so you could have a good understanding of what could happen with you. Go see your doctor on a regular basis. Make sure you get those checkups. And handle those things that you can control. If we're living in a world that's losing control, control the things you can, and the world become much better. And that is how you eat, how much exercise you do, the amount of rest that you can get in your life, and how you can reduce stress. If you can handle those 4 things, you can have a better control over your overall health and have more control of those things that are around you. So that's my piece. Dr. Gigi, Please take us home.
Yes, I would say, and if you go to the doctor and they're not treating you well or giving you answers, get another doctor. Remember that there are excellent resources. We talked about the Henson Foundation.
Yes.
We talked about blackdoctor.org, the
Yes.
Association of Black Cardiologists.
Yes.
Lots of people that are out there that can
Black
help
Coalition Against
treat
COVID.
you, right, and
Yes.
treat you in a dignified manner with the respect and care and love that you deserve. And
Yes.
if you are having a problem, it's likely that a few million people are also having it too. They're just not talking
Absolutely.
about it.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
in honor of Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., I hope that we today have helped to educate and bring out some of the things that maybe have not been discussed too much. And we would love to hear from you about what future topics that you.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow. The same thing with her, right? She dropped
you.
out.
Here we
There
go.
she
There we
is.
go.
There she is.
What future topics?
Are you
Okay,
there?
we got you back.
Yes. We're here.
She may not. She may
I
not
don't think
hear
she
us.
can hear us. Yeah, I don't think she
But
can.
I think I know where she was going with that. What future topics you would like for us to address and discuss? Because again, this today's program, it's all about you and how to improve your health outcomes, right?
Yes.
How do we improve your health outcomes, including your mental health outcomes?
Yes.
We have a myriad of programs. We have a myriad of articles on blackdoctor.org that talk about your overall health. We got a show that talks about your financial health too, because we know if we are stressed about our money,
Yes.
okay, that's
Yes.
going to impact our physical health.
Yes.
So we talk about all of these things: spiritual health, mental health, physical health, financial health. All of these things they come together because they impact how we feel about ourselves and how our body is responding. So I just want to say this has been a total blessing. Pastor Webb, I couldn't have had a better person to end this whole day. It's 5 hours, and it's gone by so fast.
Yes.
It's just been wonderful. So
thank you so much.
Continue to be a blessing on the people in your community. Continue
Amen.
to be a blessing for us here at Black Doctor. And I just want to say thank you and have a blessed day.
You too. Thank you so much. God bless you all.